Hi guys, I'm back again for another Beatles story. This time I want to talk about I Am the Walrus, one of my favourite Beatles songs, probably one of the best songs that they ever did, and definitely one of the most interesting when you think about them lyrically and musically as well. John Lennon's written so many amazing songs that you can spend hours and hours dissecting, but is this one worth the dissection? Do you actually need to understand the lyrics to this in order to enjoy it? I don't personally think so, but I want to talk to you about why it's one of the most interesting songs in terms of the creation of the song and how it was written. I want to give a little bit of context about the place the band were in at the time before we actually dive into the song and the recording. So on August 27th, 1967, Brian Epstein was found dead in his London home on 24 Chapel Street of an overdose of sleeping pills and alcohol. Brian Epstein was the one who discovered the Beatles. He was the driving force that made them the global superstars. He was often referred by many experts as the fifth Beatle, though that is still up for debate, but in my opinion he would get my vote. Paul McCartney knew the seismic impact of Epstein's death on the band. He said the psychological force that was holding us together was gone. John Lennon actually thought the band would disband after Brian died. When Brian was found dead, Beatles were in Bangor, Wales at a retreat at the Maharishis. Cut the retreat short as soon as they heard that they met straight at Paul McCartney's house a couple of days later in order to discuss the band's future. McCartney, as expected, took the lead and urged the group to go straight back into the studio and begin working on what would be their next album, The Magical Mystery Tour. This is often referred to as a DLC of Sgt. Pepper's, building on the songs that they perfected in Sgt. Pepper's in their hippie Maharishi phase that they were going through at the time. So I Am the Walrus became the first song that the Beatles recorded after Brian Epstein's death. So it's fair to say that it was the song that kept them together, and that makes it important on its own. If they'd not had I Am the Walrus to go in and record, who knows what would have happened, but it was also a reflection of the beginning of a new creative era. The song is surreal and has an experimentative style. It reflects Lennon's desire to push musical boundaries during a time of personal and professional uncertainty. Lennon actually began writing the song in late August of 1967, crafting it from ideas, phrases that he'd accumulated over the time. Several of these ideas were police sirens that he once heard while at home in Weybridge. He heard the rhythm of a police siren started to match the beat of Mr. City, Policeman Sitting Pretty. He had that beat going on for ages while trying to match it to the sound of the police sirens. Pete Shotton, in his book about John Lennon, recalled a time that they were both lucky dipping through fan mail. Lennon pulled out a letter and read it. It was from a student who basically was saying that his English teacher at the time was trying for them to dissect Beatles lyrics and try and understand what the Beatles were saying. Both Pete and John found this absolutely hilarious. They knew that their lyrics didn't have the kind of meaning that these academics and professors were trying to find in them. They both recall the time when they were singing songs in their school days. One song included the words Yellow Matter Custard and Dead Dog's Eye, which are obviously found now in I Am the Walrus. He was also influenced by everyday observations, things like sitting on a cornflake and waiting for the van to come. He could always find poetry in mundane moments. And sitting in an English garden was inspired by John Lennon, often spending 2 hours a day on his garden step, just looking out, reflecting, thinking about life, maybe even trying to piece together some songs. But Lennon always wanted to challenge listeners and critics, and he tried to appease absurd imagery such as semolina pilchard climbing up the Eiffel Tower. Semolina is a kind of dessert that you'd get at that time in England, like classic schoolhouse dessert, and pilchard is a type of sardine. As with much of their music in that period, Bob Dylan was a huge influence on them. His cryptic, imagery-heavy lyrics often inspired John Lennon. He later said, "You stick a few images together, thread them together, and call it poetry." Does this mean that he doesn't believe in poetry? I'm not sure if it necessarily means that. John has tried often to convey his feelings in songs like Help and Norwegian Wood, emotions that he was going through to try and tell stories. But I do think if you look through a lot of Lennon's lyrics, there is a lot of nonsense in there. There's a lot of good sounding words that go well together in order to create the melody for the song. I think at times he felt he had something to say, he would try and say it, like for example with Beautiful Boy that he wrote in his solo career. There's also times as well where if he had the melody and he had two obscure sounding words, he would sort of put them together, try and create a good song. I don't think it's black and white. He was such a visionary in terms of music that if he felt he had the melody in tune for a good song, he had to get the song out, and that's what he would do. Obviously there was the literary references as well in the song as the walrus. It actually refers to Lewis Carroll's poem The Walrus and the Carpenter. Lennon admired the surreal quality of the poem, but later realised that the walrus actually symbolised capitalism and greed. But at the time, when he later reflected on it, he said, "I am the carpenter" doesn't sound very good though, does it? And it doesn't. I Am the Walrus is the perfect name. So let's go through the recording session. So it spanned 5 sessions between September the 5th 5th and September the 29th. So on September the 5th, the basic rhythm track was recorded at Studio One. Lennon was on electric piano, McCartney was on tambourine and bass, but went from bass and switched to tambourine. Harrison, of course, on rhythm guitar and Starr on drums. On the next day, Lennon added his haunted vocal track. And then it was a few weeks by, they were working on other songs at the time. Full on the Hill, Flying, Blue Jay Way. They were all sort of mixed in between that period. But during that period, George Martin, another contender for the fifth Beatle, had been arranging an orchestral overdub. So that's where you add in your violins, your cellos and your horns that you can hear on the original track. A couple of days after that, between the 28th and the 29th of September, the final overdubs were done, including the avant-garde vocals from Mike Sam's Singers, and this is where we incorporated the BBC Live radio broadcast. This was because John was insistent on having a radio dial be switched during the song, so whatever came out of that radio was whatever was going to end up on the song. What actually ended was a BBC 4 live recording of King Lear, and it was Act 4, Scene 6. This sort of shows Lennon's fascination with blending like high art and pop culture. Oh God. I've got this Brewdog calendar for Christmas and you just can't go wrong with any of them. Every one of them's so good. As typical with any Beatles song around this time, the song has a very unconventional structure. Got abrupt transitions and layered sections. Got intros, verses, refrains, bridges, and an extended outro. But it made the recording a real technical challenge. Lennon often changed arrangements completely spontaneously, requiring flexibility from the engineering team and the band. George Martin's score for the orchestra called for classical musicians to embrace experimental techniques such as blurred descending notes and dramatic glissandos. So the musicians, who were obviously classically trained, found stuff like this very hard to accomplish. Lennon wanted his vocals to sound like he was coming from the moon. Engineer Jeff Emmerich achieved this by overloading the microphone preamps, creating a smooth distortion. It was an innovative process but still time consuming, and it violated EMI's strict recording policies. Ringo struggled to maintain a steady tempo as the song's length and shifting dynamics made it difficult to stay consistent. Paul McCartney stood in front of Ringo with a tambourine, basically beating the rhythm into him. Ringo is a humble enough person to have allowed Paul to do this. Paul was the glue of the band. This is just another example of him doing that. Paul understood the challenges of the song, and instead of pushing John, he let John's creativity flow at full pace, but just helped Ringo keep the beat in time. Paul musically is almost so far on another level to the rest of them, in my opinion. Lennon's desire to incorporate live radio broadcasts, the King Lear part I mentioned earlier, posed its own unique technical difficulties. An EMI radio tuner had to be patched into the mixing console, and the team experimented with tuning until they captured snippets of King Lear. There were various mixing challenges that went throughout the song as well. It actually required both a mono and a stereo mix, so the live radio elements were added during the mixing process, requiring multiple takes to synchronise the dialogue with the music. Final mix spliced together two takes. Take 10 and take 22 to create a cohesive track. But on the stereo mix, second half of the song remained in mono as the live radio elements were not recorded on the multi-track tapes. Engineers used artificial double tracking to create a pseudo stereo effect, which was met with criticism for its uneven sound quality. For the 50th anniversary of the edition of the Beatles Blue Album, the 67 and 70 songs, Peter Jackson had AI technology, and it was used to separate and isolate elements from the original 1967 tapes. It allowed engineers to treat each component separately. So you got your vocals separately along with your instruments, your radio broadcast, etc. The AI tools enabled the first ever stereo remix of I Am the Walrus. The engineers then had to carefully synchronise the King Lear dialogue and other elements to recreate the live feel of the original mono remix. Despite all this work that went into it, was met with a lot of backlash. Many fans felt that the AI remix altered the character of the song, particularly the outro. The dialogue from King Lear was mixed a lot lower, and additional radio noise drowned out key musical elements like the ascending strings. Fans argued that the chaotic brilliance of the original song was completely lost in the remix. Giles Martin, George Martin's son, defended the remix, stating, "The stereo in the second half is basically an artificial double-tracked mono. We tried to recreate the experience, but it was a challenge." So I just want to talk to you about the cultural impact and the legacy of the song. So it was actually released as a B-side to Hello Goodbye in November of 1967. The song initially confused listeners, but became a fan favourite for its bold experimentation and abstract lyrics. Many fans interpreted the lyrics as deeply symbolic, but Lennon later came out and said, The words don't mean a lot, it's just poetry. The surreal production and the avant-garde techniques and the blending of high art and pop influenced generations of artists. The film Magical Mystery Tour is still mixed with plenty of fans today, but definitely one of the highlights is the I Am the Walrus sequence. It showcases the Beatles' crazy and amazing creativity and willingness to embrace the absurd. I Am the Walrus stands as one of the Beatles' most experimental and iconic tracks, reflecting Lennon's wit, creativity and defiance of convention. The challenges of recording and remixing the song illustrate the complexity of their artistry, while Peter Jackson's AI technology demonstrates how modern tools can reshape our own understanding of classic music. I Am the Walrus is one of the best songs the Beatles ever did. I was first introduced to the song reading Hunter Davies' book, enthralled by what he was talking about with the strange lyric. I think the song not having a standard chorus is one of my favourite things about the song. It's absolutely brilliant. I think it's so catchy, it's so abstract, it's so strange, it just doesn't make any sense. I love it. I think it's one of the songs that's timeless and one of the ones that people will be listening to for 100 years or so. Whether the lyrics matter or not is a pure example of how great the Beatles were. They could make people think even when there was nothing to think about. The Beatles are still one of the most influential bands of all time, and they always will be, and this song is just a small example of the kind of work that they were putting out every single week when in the 1960s. 7 years was all they had together, and yet they still dogged the charts with classic song after classic song. I can't believe this was a B-side. It's far superior to Hello Goodbye for me, but one of the standout moments, maybe the standout moment of Magical Mystery Tour. So thank you very much for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe. I've got other Beatles videos on my channel, so please check them out. If you like the Beatles content, or you like any rock music content, please comment down below what you'd like me to do next. More than happy to do anything. I'm open. Thanks very much. Take care and have a nice day.